Sometimes the future doesn't just knock, it kicks the door right down. And for humanoid robots in our hospitals, the COVID-19 pandemic wasn't just some crisis. It was the ultimate real-world stress test. We're going to dive into how that global catastrophe basically became a time machine, cramming a decade's worth of robotic development into just a few short months. So, what's with this number? Well, this is the massive jump in funding for a hospital robot company called Diligent Robotics. Just before the pandemic, they'd raised about $3 million. But a few months into the crisis, that number rocketed up to $10 million. Yeah, that's a 233% increase. And it's the perfect snapshot of the sudden, almost desperate demand for a whole new kind of helper on the front lines. All right, so let's start with the catalyst itself, the COVID-19 pandemic. In early 2020, what had been this kind of slow and steady development in robotics suddenly became an urgent, desperate necessity. It sparked a total revolution in how we even think about providing care. Just try to imagine the pressure cooker environment our hospitals became. Systems were completely overwhelmed. You had this constant high risk of infection for the staff, a critical shortage of protective gear, and on top of all of that, patients were suffering from this profound, crushing loneliness. A solution that could minimize direct human contact wasn't some luxury. It was a matter of survival. And right into this chaos steps a very unlikely hero, the surface robot. And suddenly, this wasn't science fiction anymore. These machines, which had been kind of developing in the background for years, were all at once thrust into the spotlight to try and tackle the pandemic's biggest challenges. So when we say robot, what are we really talking about here? In this case, it's humanoid, or anthropomorphic robots. Basically, they're designed to look and move like the human body. And it turns out that human-like form is their single biggest advantage. It's their secret weapon. And here's why that human-like design is so important. Our world, and especially our hospitals, are built for people. A humanoid robot can move down hallways, open doors, and even use elevators without needing the hospital to do any expensive custom renovations. That made them a perfect solution for a crisis that needed answers right now. Okay, so the theory sounds great, but how did it actually play out in the real world? Let's take a look at how these robots were actually deployed on the front lines when the stakes couldn't have been higher. And they weren't just doing one thing. Their roles were incredibly varied. Sure, about 40% of their use was direct clinical care, like taking vitals, but they were just as critical for logistics, public screening, and even patient support. They weren't a one-trick pony. They became this super versatile part of the healthcare team. In India, a robot named Mitra took on one of the most heartbreaking parts of the pandemic, the loneliness. It had a tablet on its chest, and it became a lifeline, connecting patients in isolation to their loved ones. It really showed that sometimes the most important care isn't medical at all, it's emotional. Then you have Tommy over in Italy. This robotic nurse was a total game changer. It could monitor vital signs from the hallway. This meant doctors could check on patients without any direct contact, which saved so much precious PPE and dramatically lowered the risk of infection for the staff. Meanwhile, in Rwanda, a whole team of robots took on up to half of all the technical work in some clinics. We're talking taking temperatures, monitoring patients. They created this crucial buffer that seriously cut down on transmission between patients and their human caregivers. You might even recognize this one. Even the world's most famous humanoid robot, Sophia, was given a new job. She was taking temperatures, leading exercises for the elderly, and just acting as a companion to fight off that loneliness. It just goes to show how adaptable these robots can be, shifting from a technical job to a social one. So the big takeaway here is that the benefits were immediate and they were tangible. They saved resources, they saved time, they protected healthcare workers, and they brought comfort to patients. In that moment of crisis, these robots absolutely proved their worth. So it sounds like a perfect success story, right? Technology swoops in and meets this incredible challenge. But this is where the story gets a whole lot more complicated. Because when you introduce robots into our most human spaces, you run right into the human question. This quote just nails it. For all the practical advantages, bringing these machines into a place as deeply personal as healthcare comes with a whole host of anxieties, fears, and some really uncomfortable feelings. And a lot of that discomfort can be explained by this concept called the uncanny valley. The theory goes that we're okay with robots that look a little human, but when they get too close to looking real, but aren't quite perfect, they just feel eerie. Think about a robot like Mitra, which has a simple, friendly design. Now compare that to a hyper-realistic robot like Sophia, whose face can be pretty unsettling for some people. That psychological barrier is a huge deal. And this is the core tension. It forces us to ask, where do you land on this? I mean, really, if you imagine a robot at your own hospital bedside, do you see a helpful assistant, or do you see a creepy companion that just doesn't belong there? And these aren't just vague feelings. The concerns are very specific. You've got healthcare staff who worry about their jobs being replaced, or who feel that robots should only be used for heavy lifting. And then on the other side, you've got patients who are afraid of the dehumanization of care, worrying that a robot caregiver could actually lead to more isolation and neglect, not less. So this all brings us to the most important part of the conversation. The pandemic proved that this technology has a real place in our world. The debate can't be about whether we should use robots in healthcare anymore. The real conversation we need to have is about how we're going to do it right. This really is the fundamental shift. The pandemic answered the if question for us. Their value was proven under the most extreme pressure imaginable. So now we're left with the much, much harder question of how. How do we integrate these machines into our lives responsibly, ethically? So the path forward has to be deliberate. We can't just let this technology run wild. It needs a three-pronged approach. First, we have to understand the full impact. Second, we need to develop regulations to keep these interactions safe. And third, we have to create an ethical framework so that when humans and robots work together, it actually benefits everybody. Because ultimately, the goal isn't just to deploy more technology. It's about creating a thoughtful roadmap to make sure we harness all this potential in a way that truly enhances care and has a positive impact on all of society. And that leaves us with this final, essential question. Technology can solve logistical problems, it can reduce risk, it can even offer some form of companionship. But care, at its heart, is a human act. As we move forward, our greatest challenge will be figuring out how to build a future where robots help us care for one another without ever losing that irreplaceable human touch.